Many Madoff victims are having to sell their most prized possessions at auction. NBC's Michelle Kaczynski joins us now with the details. Michelle?
Now, hi there. This was a pretty emotional scene in South Florida last night. You didn't know whether to feel sad to see this room full of things that once very wealthy people were now having to sell to pay their reduced mortgages in their smaller homes that they've moved out of, or having to liquidate their entire homes and sell all of these little items at just cut-rate bargain basement prices that you just had to think they had to have paid top dollar for. Or you didn't know whether to be happy for the people who were just ecstatic to buy these massive pieces of antique furniture, etc., at those prices. And you didn't know whether to be more amazed at just the array of things, from jewel-encrusted ivory carved elephants to Marc Chagall lithographs just hanging up on the wall at such prices, or to be more amazed at the fact that people were still buying this stuff and still collecting these little items of things that you didn't think you would really see anywhere. The bad news is that the prices were very low that they were going for. Even the estimated selling prices that the auctioneers had set, in many cases, did not meet that mark. The Chagall lithographs that I mentioned would normally sell, they said, for 25 to 80 grand. They were going for more like 15,000 here. There was some disappointment in the auctioneers' voices, too, asking the crowd, saying, come on, this is a Picasso, guys, come on. A small Picasso etching sold for around $5,400, and that was about the minimum that they thought they would get for it. One item, though, was really eye-catching in more ways than one. This was a diamond and emerald necklace, just a massive piece of jewelry, worth retail, they said, $500,000. Well, it sold for $75,000. The starting bid was $50,000 for this piece. Here's what the people who bought it said last night.
It's a very sad situation, but I feel like it's a win-win situation, because if we're able to help out somebody else through this, then it's a win-win situation for everyone. And so, therefore, someone gets something else back, and in turn, we get a very good investment.
The auctioneer told us that some of those Madoff victims were in the crowd last night. None of them would admit to it. None of them wanted to be identified. You had to imagine how tough that was to see their life's treasures, things that they thought would be passed down from generation to generation, just sold off like that. And some things didn't even sell at below the minimum opening bid. They really tried to get rid of some of this stuff. But we talked to one family today who said, you know what, this is a good thing. She said, it's helping my mother pay her bills. We still need to sell mom's house. But the people who are buying these things from people who need the money are really doing good. And we're going to see more of these auctions in New York and South Florida in the next few weeks.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Michelle. And my curiosity is, who in that crowd was buying? Were they Americans? Were they international? Did you get a sense for the crowd? Because we're trying always to take the temperature of who's in that kind of ultimate consumer position to be able to purchase things like this now.
Right. I'm glad you asked that question, because one thing that was interesting was this was an auction open to the world, people calling in from all over the world, and it was also on the Internet live. A lot of callers from Russia, several from China. The majority of them, of the more than 500 buyers who were registered at this auction, were from the United States. And we would ask them, what are you looking for? In this economy, you're still buying, huh? And one guy told us point blank, hey, we're loaded. We're stimulating the economy. We did not invest with Madoff. Many of them were from here in South Florida, but again, people calling from all over the world.
Okay, thank you so much, Michelle. Now let's turn back to government command and control. What's that mean for bondholders, and could the government end up owning both GMAC and General Motors? Here to debate, Thea Lee, Policy Director at the AFL-CIO, and Jim Glassman, former Undersecretary of State and President of the World Growth Institute. And let's kick things off with you, Jim. And what's the idea here? Is this going to be to have an overarching industry that's 100% government controlled?
Yeah, the overarching idea is for the government, in partnership with the United Auto Workers, to own the vast majority of General Motors and Chrysler, and as well to own the company, GMAC, that provides the financing for GM and Chrysler's dealers and for the people who buy these cars. Now, that is a gigantic change in the way that we expect capitalism to be run. But even worse than that is what happened with the Chrysler bankruptcy. And I was very happy to see 3 pension funds today from Indiana challenging that agreement. And in that agreement, the government, again, in partnership with the UAW, ran roughshod over decades of law that says that secured creditors stand in front of other creditors. The same thing is about to happen in GM, but the difference there is you've got a lot of very small bondholders who are absolutely going to be steamrollered unless the government backs off and respects the law. And I think this is affecting markets in general. I call this now legal volatility. You don't know as an investor what the law is going to end up being.
Thea, do you disagree with the facts as characterized by Ambassador Glassman? These were secured bondholders. Secured bondholders, that means they stand ahead in line of unsecured bondholders. That's what's agreed to in the first place. That's why they take less interest. So if that's the case, I mean, is justice blind or not? Do we make these designations based on the law or based on something like identity politics or who's politically popular at the moment?
Well, I think we're talking about an extraordinary situation, and the government stepping in to save the auto industry, which is essential to saving the rest of the U.S. economy. And there are extraordinary steps being taken. I don't think anybody expects this to be a run-of-the-mill kind of action, but, you know, a lot of those bondholders...
Why not? I mean, if we did it now and we're in a recession, what's to say we don't have another industry that runs into this problem? I mean, it doesn't seem likely that we do have other troubled industries. If we set this precedent, why do we not expect that we'll be doing this again and again and again?
You know, a lot of these bondholders bought those bonds at pennies on the dollar, so it's not unreasonable to think that they're not going to make back all the money that they started
with. And some of them bought the bonds at 100 cents on the dollar.
To come back to this question about extraordinary times calling for extraordinary measures, we learned today from President Obama that in the case of how we respond to terrorism, of how we respond to threats, that we will not do ad hoc legal decisions. But in this case, it sounds like that, yes, we will do ad hoc legal decisions. How do you make that distinction?
It's interesting you should use the word terrorism. A lot of people would think, and that's way over the top, but certainly destroying decades of legal tradition. This is going to severely damage the confidence of investors in making investments in corporate bonds in general. And by the way,
I really think
just a second. In the GM case, we're talking about many small bondholders. I read an article in the Wall Street Journal, a news article, about somebody, a tool and die worker, who invested $100,000 in GM bonds, which is now going to be worth almost nothing because the GM bondholders who own $27 billion worth of bonds are going to get 10% of the company, while the UAW is going to get about 1/3 of the company, even though in a normal bankruptcy it would be completely wiped out in its claims. So this is what's going on. I think Americans should know this.
Thea, why do auto workers count more than, say, retired cops in Indiana who've gotten shredded in this plan in terms of their pension plan? Why does one worker count more than another worker?
It's not a question of one worker counting more than another. A deal was brokered in this case to save the company. The company was in deep, deep trouble. People could have walked away with nothing. You know, you make an investment and sometimes it doesn't work out.
Let me just posit a guess that the company is not going to end up being saved. Now, this is just a guess, and I hope that's not true. The problem that GM has and that Chrysler has very little to do with the things we're talking about today. It has to do with lowering its costs and producing better cars. Now, you show me evidence that that's actually going to happen by, for example, destroying dealers' franchises, taking franchises away in an effort to raise prices on American consumers. Is that going to improve the sales of Chryslers and GM
That's another
cars?
whole
I don't think so.
Which most analysts thought there were too many dealers, and that was going to have to be dealt with at some point. It's not pretty. It's painful.
Sure, dealers go broke, but the idea that say we're going to raise prices by getting rid of the dealers. No, they need
the auto
to
workers
improve
and the retirees
the cars
gave their
that they
lives
make
to this
and cut their
company.
Okay, guys,
costs.
sorry, we got to wrap it there. Thank you so much, Thea Lee and Jim Glassman. And more of the Kudlow Report is coming up. A programming note, the Kudlow Report will return to its usual time on Tuesday following the holiday weekend. Don't go.